So that poor leper had two sufferings to carry. Not only was he suffering from illness, but he was also cut off from the community. Lepers had to live outside the village or town in a sort of a leper colony because they believed of the contagious nature of the disease. The leper is unclean. He shall dwell alone in a habitation outside the camp. In the first reading from the book of Leviticus, we hear the rules concerning lepers. When people were nearby lepers were to say, "Unclean, unclean." And the leper shouldn't even have been in the village that day when Jesus came. And even when he approached Jesus, the leper kept his distance. Jesus had to stretch out his hand to touch him when curing him. And when Jesus healed the leper, Jesus not only healed his illness, but restored him to his community and family once again. We just think about what the lepers suffered down through the centuries of being isolated like that. And today we are still experiencing the painful isolation of people trying to stay safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. By February this year, COVID-19 had infected about 100 million people worldwide, with over 60 million recovering, a lot more recovering, and about 2 million deaths. This is right around the world. And through the centuries, humankind has been beset by many illnesses, some of which have altered the course of history. For example, in the 14th century, the Black Death or the bubonic plague swept through Asia and Europe. By the year 1350, about half of the population of Europe had died from the bubonic plague. In more recent times, in 1918, there was the epidemic of influenza. It lasted from February 1918 to April 1920. It infected about 500 million people. That's about a third of the world's population in 4 successive waves. The death toll is estimated to be somewhere between 20 million and 50 million people. So those have been huge disasters for humankind in the past. And during an epidemic, one of the first reactions is to quarantine the sick so as to protect the healthy, and separated from the rest of society. Those held in quarantine suffer doubly, first from the illness and its terrors, then from the isolation. In the ancient world, victims of leprosy knew all too well this double dose of suffering. We are meant for community. We are not meant for isolation. Whenever we celebrate the Eucharist, we are celebrating as a community, and in community we make Christ real. And love is always the characteristic of the Christian community. As Paul said to the Corinthians, "If I give away everything but I am without love, it will do me no good whatever." Jesus also said, "By this will all know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another." And that's why Paul could say in our second reading today, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." In other words, take me for your model as I take Christ for my model. And so everyone in the community is to reflect Christ. So we've been created for community. We're called to live our faith in and with a community. And the one effect of the coronavirus pandemic has been that we can't gather in church for Mass as we used to. And as we all know, at the moment, we're only allowed 50 people to gather inside our church for a service. And so that means that we will need to observe Ash Wednesday next week in a new way. So this year, in 2021, we will have Ash Wednesday at home. Mass will be live streamed on Ash Wednesday in the morning of the 17th of February, as we do every day. And then, this is what I ask. I ask that you visit the church, collect the blessed ashes, and take them home. The ashes will be in a little envelope, be attached to a leaflet with a prayer service. And so at home, gather your family, and in the prayer service, the leader of the service can sprinkle the blessed ashes on top of the heads of all present. And so that will be Ash Wednesday at home. That's the best way that we can connect to each other in faith in the midst of the pandemic. It is challenging to live our faith in and with the community in this time. And it's easy to feel isolated and disconnected from our parish during a time when just 50 people are permitted to gather in the church. So this year, in 2021, I encourage you, as we begin the season of Lent next week on Wednesday, that we can make a special effort to connect as community in new ways. On our parish website, we have about 1,400 subscribers, and we have over 500 people each week reading the newsletter which appears every Friday morning by email in your inbox. And so, if you're not subscribed, if you're not getting our newsletter, please do so during Lent. Also, if you know of a Catholic who feels isolated and disconnected, make an effort during Lent to reach out. And so I want to encourage us all to make Lent 2021 a time of connecting and reaching out to family, reaching out to all in our parish community. And so important that we can connect in a meaningful way. Here is an example. So Mary sends a WhatsApp to me. It's a Bible verse and it reads, "Whatever you do, do all to the glory of God." 1 Corinthians 10:31. Now, it comes as an image with a pretty border, background picture. It's written in a fancy font. And I just delete it because it's got no connection to me. There are many of these memes and things like that. Look pretty, floating on the web, but it's basically anonymous. It's like spam. Then Miriam sends me a WhatsApp. It says, "Dear Keith, I read, 'Whatever you do, do all to the glory of God,' in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 31. And it touched me. I had a bit of self-pity in my isolation, but realized that despite my isolation, I can live for the glory of God." I read that WhatsApp. You see how different it is. Miriam has shared of herself, and I've listened to Miriam. And in this way, I'm connected to Miriam. And I'm humbled by her sharing and her trust. It's not reading spam. This is connecting to a real person. Jesus stretched out his hand and touched a leper. And just as Jesus connected to that leper, so Miriam connects to me in that message, and I'm all the better for it. When reading scripture, I always like to look at the readings of the day from the Missal, because each day has a focus. It can be meaningful for some to read random verses of scripture, but I much prefer the readings of the day. If I look at the weekday readings of the day for 2 years, I will be reading all the significant passages from the Bible. If I look at the Sunday readings over a period of 3 years, I'll be reading all the significant passages from the Bible. And so it's not just little bits what I like. I get a comprehensive overview in doing that. You see, the liturgical year and spiritual life coincide. This is a certainty. Because the goal of spiritual life is to let oneself be increasingly open to the God of all creation. And the liturgy is the most important way of helping us in this. We are created so that we can become ourselves completely when, and only when, we let ourselves be open to God, both explicitly or implicitly. We love, and we are loved insofar as this takes place, whether we know it or not. And Jesus lived among us as a human being in time and space, and the liturgy gradually exposes us to that. When we live the seasons of Advent and Christmas and Lent and Easter and ordinary time, we are living the life of Jesus, and we are encountering his presence among us. And so these 4 points just describe the spiritual life, which allows us to encounter God and discover our meaning and purpose in life. And so as Jesus healed the leper and restored him to community, we are reminded that we have been created for community. We are called to live our faith in and with a community. And so this Lent, 2021, I call on us all to connect as a parish community.